the 31th day of the month of May. Welcome in. Dave Trafford here. It is the Writ Race, the daily edition of On the Ledge. It's the Ontario Politics Podcast. You know, in the marathon, it's the last 6 miles that kill you. The first 20 miles, go. But you really have to grind to get through the last 6. Kind of feels like that's where we are right now. We're just grinding to get to the finish line. And I get a sense from the parties that that's what they're doing. So let's get into it. Keith Leslie is here from CHTV. Sabrina Nanji is the brain trust behind Queen's Park Observer. And I just, before we hit the record button here, heard Steven Del Duca on with John Moore on News Talk 1010, Sabrina, and trying to sound all up and excited and positive about the momentum that's circulating and swirling around all of his Liberal candidates. And you got to think that he's going to be quite happy to be able to put the talking points aside, maybe Saturday morning just to go to Fortino's and, do his regular weekly shopping, and maybe he'll just be Citizen Steve by then.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is going to be a tough slog for him to win over in Vaughan-Woodbridge, but it's funny, you mentioned the grocery shopping. I think he brought that up when he was, sort of grilled by reporters, how much time are you really spending, pounding the pavement in Vaughan-Woodbridge, which is going to be a tough race, what pollsters say, what my own reporting, talking to voters there suggests. And he says, he's usually out shopping late after he's campaigning across the rest of the province. So, yeah, I thought that one was interesting. Of course, he's also promising, to scrap part of the HST on prepared foods at grocery stores. So it seems a bit grocery themed. And with, inflation at what it is and rates going up, I mean, it's a topical issue. But of course, only some of that is in provincial purview. So anyways, I don't want to digress here, get on the grocery rant. But yeah, of course, it's everyone's going hard right now. Del Duca, of course, he would say that, it's very hard to knock him off of his talking points, and confidence, this image that he's putting out there. But the polls suggest otherwise, right? Like there are some that put the NDP on top, for official opposition in certain spots, but still losing seats. The Liberals, not doing so hot, but it does seem that even if he, forms official opposition, that
that's going to kick her out.
Yeah. And she was on a good roll there.
Yeah.
Yeah, what about those broadband promises? I don't know. Sorry.
That's a good pickup.
All right. So
it's just, of course, this would happen. Yeah, just as we get closer to the campaign, I don't know. It feels like some kind of omen.
Well, it really is indicative. I mean, so for those of you just listening, we've hit a broadband bump here, and bit of a lost signal. But there have been so many things, Sabrina, that have kind of happened over the last 2 or 3 weeks that have more or less, I think, characterized this campaign in a really unique way. We start with 2 leaders getting COVID. Keith yesterday mentioned that Horvath's plane had to be shut down because of mechanical issues. And yesterday, Keith, we had Andrea Horvath was supposed to be on the John Moore show. Well, it turns out John Moore tested positive for COVID, so it wasn't in the studio yesterday. Jerry Agar was on. And I guess the advance team just realized they got up in the morning and heard Jerry on and thought, maybe this wouldn't be the best use of our time. So she pulled the pin on that.
And who was
interview.
filling in for Jerry? That would be Deb Hutton.
Right.
Oh, well, perhaps we'll just skip CFRB.
Entirely.
1010 today.
Now, having said that, that's the only radio appearance that the Premier has made in Toronto is on Jerry Agar's show, but when Deb Hutton was hosting it. So the game's around who's on the air and who's asking the questions. But
for listeners who aren't that familiar with Deb Hutton, not only was she married to the former PC leader Tim Hudak, still is, excuse me, I shouldn't say was, she was also the chief of staff to Mike Harris and an advisor of sorts to Ernie Eves. So she's definitely a conservative insider and someone with whom I think Doug Ford and his team in particular would feel very comfortable allowing him, the Premier, to go in for an on-air live interview, which we are not seeing anywhere else in this campaign. The closest we saw was, I guess, Martin Redcon of the Star getting to go door knocking with the Premier. And that was billed as an exclusive because it was. I mean, this is, I've mentioned before, we've gone beyond the bubble boy protection to peekaboo or hide the candidate campaign. And my big complaint with that, it's one thing to protect your lead and go in, you know, you've got the conservative leader, he's the Premier, you want to, avoid any gaffes, and he may be a little bit gaffe prone. But what about all those local candidates that have refused to show up for the debates? I know, we're past that now, but this is how democracy works, and shutting out the local guys, having them just say, no, we prefer to go door knocking, and we can't have journalists watch us go door knocking. No, sorry, we can't have that. They just don't want citizen engagement, and I really, really fail to understand that when you've got the campaign down to 29 days, it's already blown by. I know it feels for us like we've been in it forever and we all want it to end. I imagine the candidates feel the same. But that's a really short window. And for you to hide not only the Premier, but the PC candidates in many, over half the ridings across the province that we're aware of is just wrong.
So let me just kind of go to the next step then, because yesterday we were sort of on, we finished on the note around this allegation that Ford was going to privatize healthcare. And brought up the idea that, there were a number of tests that people were pointing to. And I know I've had a couple of blood tests done that I had to pay for out of my own pocket. But that's been going on for the last 10 years. So it wasn't really new. Was there any smoke there? And we realize now that any of the allegations around this, there's no real change. The health ministry stepped up and unusually in the middle of a campaign and said, nothing to see here, really. If you want to debate whether or not you should be paying for them, that's one thing. But there's nothing to it. And I say that, Sabrina, because that's where we go in campaigning now. It stopped happening in terms of journalists talking to the leaders, journalists actually going door to door with candidates or at all candidates' meetings. And now the fight is being taken online. And this is a great example. It's completely out of control. When I saw that trending last night, my first reaction was, okay, that's just a bunch of bullshit for sure now. That just confirmed it for me. And so this becomes a real danger for anybody who's campaigning, because that close to it, if we hadn't done the fact check on it, and there's still people out there who are going to believe that is sticky. That kind of stuff is going to be hard to, turn around. Now, I'm not suggesting it'll necessarily have a huge wave and a change of vote. But if this had happened earlier in the campaign, it might have had an effect.
Yeah, I mean, I had to dig into this one too. I mean, obviously, when we're seeing these tweets and these Facebook posts going viral, it raises questions, because that's what these people are saying, having to pay out of pocket at a Life Labs for blood work, cancer screening tests, the stuff that is covered, that's essentially, illegal. And I don't even know if it's possible for a lab like Life Labs to actually charge for those tests. So, of course, the Ministry of Health was forced to do some damage control here. But you're right. It just goes to show you how deep the rabbit hole can get when it comes to social media misinformation. And, of course, is being used politically. I mean, Tyler Watt, the Liberal candidate in Nepean, who's also a registered nurse and, very social media savvy. Like, he used to be a Liberal staffer, provincially and federally, and does have a huge social media presence. I mean, he tweeted that it seems like the PC government has quietly delisted some of the funding OHIP coverage for these tests, and that wasn't the case. Now, of course, he's deleted the tweet, but it just shows you like the power of this, and it's a bigger problem than, just OHIP coverage of these blood tests, of course, like a ton of misinformation out there. And so I think that the onus is not only on reporters to, help debunk this and get to the bottom of it, but it's also on individuals too. And I'm just not sure if there's really that motivation, to go and look into it. And at the end of the day, some people are just kind of willing to believe whatever suits their narrative. And of course, there has been, calls to stop further privatization of the healthcare system. And so, of course, this like feeds into that narrative. But, at the end of the day, those opinions aren't based on facts. And I guess if that is happening, I would encourage those people to reach out, because it shouldn't be. And I don't really know how it's even possible.
Well, the problem with this, though, Keith, is that it steps all over the opposition's narrative. And if in fact there is a concern about, privatization, this, that, and the other thing, then we needed to ask Steven Del Duca where was this going to happen? Where is this in fact going to happen? Andrea Horvath, where is this actually happening? Show us evidence. But the problem with the tweet that Sabrina highlights is that it was from a Liberal candidate. A lot of the cuts that we were talking about and complaining about happened under a Liberal government in terms of delisting some of these tests.
Including
right?
delistings,
so,
yes.
Exactly. Yes. So I don't know. I think that's what I mean. It gets to be a dangerous place to fight a campaign. Nobody has a hand on the reins here. And how do you really hold anybody to account when the dumpster fire is fully involved?
Well, let's face it. I mean, we've taken this whole into a nice, polite new category of misinformation, when what it is straight up bullshit. And people are using their positions sometimes as patient advocates. That's not a bad thing, but you have to be telling the truth. That's why, if this had come from the Ontario Health Coalition, a really respected patient advocacy group, okay, then we'd have something. But that didn't come from them. It didn't come from that independent sort of group. We're seeing these sort of things like I saw, again, a pile-on on this was my insulin is covered as a diabetic, but my insulin needles are not. Well, okay, if that's the case, it does sound kind of bizarre. But again, when was this delisting done? When were the needles? Apparently it's not anytime recent. Nothing has been done recently. There's a situation in Windsor where, again, the PCs and the NDP are really going to be battling it out, where there was, I don't know if candidates pushed this narrative. There was a report that suggested that they might not have enough energy on hand in Windsor to attract this LG chemical plant, not the LG energy plant that apparently they do have enough electricity for, but the chemical plant that they're looking in there. And then there's another, no, we have lots of power. So this is candidates literally fighting when one of the companies has not made a decision yet about a multi-billion-dollar investment. And we've got politicians just bandying this stuff about we don't have enough electricity here. The Ford government, of course, has to come out and defend it and says we have lots of electricity here. We're just building, 5 new transmission lines because, well, we need them there. There seems to be, a truth in the middle ground here, but what's really at risk is jobs and a major investment in Windsor because of politics, bringing this up in the middle of an election campaign without having hard facts, without having something, other than just social media backing this and some nebulous report. It seems this is the kind of politics that gets very, very dangerous very quick. I mentioned before about being a 29-day campaign. That doesn't mean a lot of damage can't be done in that sort of a campaign, and that's an investment that's being put at risk directly by politics. Yeah,
well, and that damage is not necessarily to one political party. It's actually an economic damage that is long-term and will have an effect on, the well-being of that particular community. But I go back to this, and, and I have said this before. We are in a place now where media is playing a major role in this, in as much as they have not, because they aren't on the buses. Well, it looks like we're going to save some money here. That's awesome. We're not going to have to put people out there and bog them down for the next month, having them come and go. There's no mechanism in place in this campaign that's as obvious as it might have been in past ones, Sabrina, where media has taken a role, and not in terms of shaping an agenda, but necessarily calling it out, whatever agendas there may be. So, for example, in that case down in Windsor, that would have been a media role more apparent, that where that would have been obvious, the question being asked on the ground. We just don't have the boots on the ground anymore to deal with that kind of stuff deeply and quickly. And there's a gap there. I know people are going to say it sounds like the media guys complaining about losing jobs. Well, yeah, we are. But at the same time, there's a role, particularly during campaigns when everything happens so quickly, to be able to hold to account, to fact check. And I'm not saying it's not being done. I'm just saying it's not being done to the degree that we have seen, let's say, even 2018.
Yeah, and of course, like especially since we're talking about, these blood tests, you kind of also run the risk of amplifying, misinformation too. But I think, even on a broader level, we kind of have had a crash course in this just before the campaign. 2 years of the pandemic, all journalists essentially became public health reporters, and there's a lot that can go wrong in that type of reporting. I just remember, hearing health officials at the outset of the pandemic, saying things that, and we were kind of just reporting them, on the face of it. And it was very difficult to do fact checking on the fly in real time. And, of course, the information was moving so quickly during the pandemic. So I do think there was a crash course in this, but also, journalism also suffered during the pandemic, and we've kind of seen that continue with a lot of the press conferences, for instance, that we're getting during the campaign, like this whole one question, one follow-up, like, oh, I'm so over it. It just really like takes away, your chance to be accountable, that whole back and forth, where like I might ask a question, then Keith jumps in with a follow-up. Like you obviously want to hear what the politicians have to say in response to your questions, but this whole, choreographed dance that we're doing right now, it just kind of gives more talking points and allows for that, and not so much accountability. So certainly, journalism has suffered. Our jobs are much more difficult, and especially in, the age of social media, when of course, we're seeing these tweets go viral. We want to fact check them, get the story out there, but they just don't land the same way as the initial viral tweet. So this is like a much broader problem. And frankly, in terms of the media buses, I'm not a big fan of going on them. Of course, they're important, to follow the leaders and hear what they're saying. But at the end of the day, you mainly just get talking points. And I think there could be a lot more done to, go out, have boots on the ground, talk to average voters, organizers, volunteers, what's actually important to them, instead of maybe, letting the pollsters. Of course, the pollsters are very good at what they do and very meticulous. But there's something to be said also, I think, for, just going out and talking, maybe sitting at a coffee shop, that type of thing.
I just want to follow up on one thing Sabrina said about why people may not understand why we feel what we used to call scrums as opposed to a one question, one follow-up format were so important. If you've watched Question Period at all, and those strict rules that are there when watching people debate in Question Period, it's not called Answer Period because they don't answer. They just evade, they dance the thing, and the format allows them to just move on to the next questioner. Well, when we would see that in Question Period, the press gallery, you could call it pack journalism if you want, but we would want to get an answer, a straight answer. And so it wouldn't be just one question, one follow-up. As Sabrina said, she would ask a question. Maybe I'd pile in. Maybe someone else would pile in. We would try and get a real firm answer. None of this evasion. You can't stand there and do talking points for 10 or 15 minutes. Well, some can. I remember Tim Hudak saying $1 billion boondoggle in response to anything. It didn't matter what it was. But then what changed that dynamic was news conferences started getting televised in their entirety. And when people saw their political leaders doing that, again, didn't matter what the question, responding with a talking point, that didn't fly as well. We need to get back to actual group questioning, if you want to call it that, or press conference, as opposed to these hard and fast rules, one person, one not. Another part of the deal is, I don't know if the pandemic changed this, but, the media has always been, we've been downsizing since I got in the business, I think, but the appetite for election coverage in particular, and this I'll speak more to broadcasters than to the print medium where there's still a bit more room, but everybody's looking for one story to round up 3 or 4 campaigns every day. They don't get, we used to have, if you have a reporter on every bus, well, that report, each bus then is going to file a report. Well, what newscasts have room for 4 reports on each campaign out there? Very, very few. So therefore we have one reporter back at the office that rounds up the campaigns, takes the best clip of this or that. This is what's happening in many, many places. So you're not getting, there's no one there to ask those follow-up questions we want to ask anyway, Sabrina. Right. In many cases, they're just not there. So this isn't the fault of the politicians. It's the fault of the media, but it's also part of the appetite. Newscasts are much tighter now on radio. In television, there's more room, but what do we feed them? There's got to be room for Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. Apparently, over a report from each candidate. So this is part of the media. Media's at fault, but it's also part of the public's appetite for how they want their media now.
I think we're into a chicken and egg thing there, though, in terms of historically, working in talk radio as long as I did, I never had an audience member ever tell me we need less newscast. I never had anybody tell me that.
I'll give you that. And I never believed in radio consultants. I think they're the evil of our industry. But I just know that, this is what we get hammered out. There's too much news, shorten it down, shorten it down. If you shorten it down, if a major newscast is 3 minutes, you don't have time for reports from 4 election campaigns.
That's right. Yep. I bring it back to there's a level of laziness there, though, and we are tolerant of it, period. And, I'm not suggesting that the people who are on the air necessarily or the ones doing the reporting are the lazy ones. We have created this lazy culture around reporting in general, particularly reporting on elections. And I guarantee you, when the number comes out, we had 52%. Up to the polls, after all this is said and done, the hue and cry is going to be, what the hell's wrong with the people out there? They don't take responsibility. They aren't. Well, it's because we have created this culture and we tolerate the culture that the political parties have driven for so long. I mean, this all goes back for me to Stephen Harper when he first decided that when we were going to go on a campaign, we're going to have a unimic. And I'm going to take the first 3 questions from local media. Well, we were paying a shitload of money to be on that plane and didn't get to ask a question.
And he had a list.
Yeah.
And he had a list of they took the reporter's list. And this was the company I worked for at the time, the Canadian Press. We refused to go on that list for over 5 years. And that really hurt us. I'd sometimes scream a question from the back of the room, but I was not recognized. I tried to go, well, that's CP Ottawa's deal. When he comes to Toronto, I can ask questions, right? Not if you're not putting your name on that list. No, I'd never put my name on the list. That kind of media tight control. I remember that it was the Harper government. They sent Jim Flaherty back to Toronto, and him and the Ontario Liberal finance minister at the time, Greg Cerbero, were going to have a news conference. And the federal guys tried to start this list. Flaherty had just left Queen's Park like 6 months previously and was more than used to all of us and the scrum type situation. Yep. And he actually waved, I don't need a list. Flaherty actually waved them off. And then we watched Cerbero and Flaherty, the Irish charm and the Italian charm, just kicking the crap out of each other, but with such smiles and politeness. And of course they were able to fend our questions. There was no need for that type of tight media control, especially with a Jim Flaherty. Let alone, Harper eventually relaxed the reins on the people he took out of Ontario, which was, Flaherty, Tony Clement, and Baird. They were the ones that were actually allowed to speak without having lists and questions, right? Because they'd come out of that Queen's Park milieu where they were tough enough to take the questions. Ottawa, this clampdown, and it's really persisted. And of course, to Sabrina's point, the pandemic has just entrenched it. And we have to get beyond it. And now they're just, this is the way the parties, this is the way we operate. You're at a unimic, and we're going to have to take a couple of calls on the phone and local report. And I never objected to the local reporters getting their questions in, but as you said, we were paying a fortune. Take a few from us as well. But I will go back in 2005, 2006, when it was that December-January campaign. I went from the Paul Martin campaign in December to the Layton campaign in January, and both of them took like 3 questions a day, maybe 4 if they could take one in French. And 1 local. So we would, we'd be on that bus paying all that money, and we would pull on the bus. We would get 2 questions if we were lucky, 3 if we had a French reporter with us. So it's been that way. That control has been there for campaigns for forever, but now it's entrenched with this one question, one follow-up, and that has to be abolished.
Well, it's funny, Sabrina. When I was at Global, they started to. And this would have been the McGuinty government. They decided that they were going to use their new fancy DeGiro and just feed it to everybody. We'll just let everybody take the feed from the minister's announcement or whatever it might be. And to Keith's point, we refused to do that. If we could get somebody there, we would. But if you didn't, you missed it. But the point being, if you weren't going to be there to be able to ask the follow-up question, then this was just the recitation of a news release for all intents and purposes. And you're right. COVID has only ingrained that now in the culture because we're so used to doing it remotely. We're satisfied with that. I get it. It's easier to do the work from your desk.
My editors used to say, do I have to pay your gas mileage to Kitchener? Can't you watch it on live stream?
Right.
Gas mileage. Not even my time. They're already paying my time. No. I can be there and back in time. So I would get those questions because it's on live stream now. You can just take the feed. Well, I can't ask a question, though, can I? Mm-hmm. Well, do we need to? I always need to. What you pay me to do is come up with questions.
So, there we go, Sabrina. That we have opened the door, as much and all as we want to say, we're trying to do our best here. We have opened the door and allowed for this to happen and it was only going to happen. It was happening anyway, but only happened more quickly because of COVID. I don't know how you turn that tide back.
Yeah, and I don't think there's much appetite to do that. Of course, when you're the powers that be, like Doug Ford, what we're seeing is, reporters like Global Sean O'Shea getting basically like roughed up by Ford's security detail for asking questions. And you can see like Ford visibly upset, bristling at, something that was just supposed to be a photo opportunity. He's getting grilled about, those fake invoices the party had sent out a while back to donors. And kudos to O'Shea there. Like, seriously, I think we could all take a page from that. But I've always been very proud of the Queen's Park Press Gallery and being part of it, and our intense questioning skills, because Keith's right. One other example I remember is Sam Osterhoff when he first came to Queen's Park. And I think, the gallery got some blowback because rarely does the public see, everything that happens in a scrum, those tight crowds where there's a bunch of microphones like shoved up in a politician's face and we're all, clamoring and asking questions over each other, that type of thing. I think it was our colleague Adrian Morrow from the Golden Mail, who's now reporting from DC, but he straight up asked Sam Osterhoff, like, are you a homophobe? Because obviously there had been some posts that had raised a lot of red flags. He's been questioned very toughly on his stance on abortion. And I think there were probably some mistakes from the party there. From an optics point of view, they put out Sam, kind of fed him to the wolves, us in the gallery there, let him, do a press conference when they had, kept him under the former leader, Patrick Brown, kept him away from us for a while. So it's kind of like we were like kind of like a dog with a bone a little bit, but important questions, of course. And I do think, Osterhoff, like, whatever you want to say about his beliefs and what he was saying is that he stood there and took the questions and, responded to them as best he could. I think that was probably something, as, the youngest MPP ever elected, we were a bit impressed with, if I can put it that way.
A lot impressed. He responded better
yeah.
than many veteran MPPs and even cabinet ministers. He took it hard, responded really, really well. Again, his positions are one thing. His ability to perform as a 19-year-old, it was basically, okay, you're 19, but you're in the big leagues. This isn't, playtime. And so he took it full on heart and he responded appropriately, defended his positions very well. And I had discussions with him later offline, and he was very interesting. And he's a straight shooter on his positions. But on that first scrum, when we were just surrounding him, and as you say, and Adrian was right over and just hit him with, are you a homo? Because we've been hitting him really hard. He handled his positions extremely well and earned a lot of respect that day. And as you say, they threw him out there. He'd been protected up to that point. They just threw him out. And it was interesting.
He fought back. I think he said, like, the quote of the day was like, I'm not here to ride the Queen's Park press pony or something like that. I'm butchering what he said now. It feels like a lifetime ago these days. But you know what? There is something to be said for that. And it's unfortunate because, I think Doug Ford and the Conservatives, like when he's called out, where's Doug? When we start seeing that hashtag trending, when his opponents politically and even reporters say, like, what's the deal? Like, are you avoiding us? Are you hiding? And, not in campaign times, he has come out and kind of, pushed back a little bit on us. Back in the day, not too long ago, after he shortly came to power, he was saying, the gallery is the media is really the official opposition. Okay. I mean, I don't think we necessarily agree with that, but of course it's our job to hold him to account, and he kind of knows about it. And I think, even some of that is red meat for a lot of conservatives and Ford Nation and his base. And so, not having him out there, of course, less chances for him to put his foot in his mouth. But at the end of the day, like, accountability is what suffers. And I do think it could kind of end up working in his favor from, like, a political standpoint.
Well, I think you're right, and I think that that what you described there in terms of the energy around the scrums, the role that both the media play at Queen's Park, the role that the MPP, okay, I'm going to stand in here and take it on the chin, and I'm going to counterpunch or do whatever it is. I think those days are gone now. I don't think we're going to have those days back ever. And I think a lot of that, we've talked about the COVID fatigue. I think there's a certain element of that here. Okay. Let's just take a breath and move on. So, we have said in the past, this is likely to be a reset for the major parties in some form or fashion. Maybe, in fact, it's a reset for media. But I think out of all of them, the ones who are least likely to reinvent themselves will be the media. I just don't see it happening. All right,
disagree.
We're going to leave it there. You're traveling tomorrow,
yes.
Keith. So Sabrina, you're here with us tomorrow. And Bob Reed, I think, is going to drop in and give us his take on things. So we'll be back at it, and we'll take this right through until Friday. And then, we're going to take a breath. This is The Rit Race. It's the daily edition of On the Ledge, the Ontario Politics podcast for Story Studio Network.